A Ghoul's Fate. Felix has always had very unique tastes. His desire is much like a fungal growth in the corner of a root cellar that receives no sunshine. It's a fat, moist little mushroom nurtured by black soil, grown extra succulent by constant secretiveness. It's important that he keep his little fetishes discreet. His public persona is painfully ordinary, even bordering on dull. He's short for a middle-aged man, only 5'4", and he's carrying around more weight than he should be. But other than that, he's just the typical oddball you'd pass on the street without even bothering to give a second look. If you stare deeply past the lenses of his bifocals, you might see a glimmer of the man's true nature. It's there in the watery gaze of his eyes, a perversion allowed to pickle in the jar of brine he calls a brain for decades now. It's on full display as he strokes the 3-inch root of his manhood, the sweat glistening on his temples and dripping down to stain his upper lip. He has an almost cherubic mouth, plump lips with a red tinge, one of the most striking features of his otherwise brown rank moon of a face. He nibbles this thick bottom lip, his grubby hand cranking at himself in a rough clockwise motion. There are several large glossy photos laid out on the desk in front of him. Images of mottled corpse flesh, limbs curled and stiff with rigor mortis, glassy eyes staring back at Felix with not even a semblance of life left in them. He used his brand new smartphone to snap these photos. He's a man without any real friends, so the texting and calling features don't appeal to him, but the high-definition camera does. It lets him take these visual souvenirs while the bodies are still laid out on the cold steel tables. He's been taking mental pictures ever since he landed the job as a mortuary assistant a few years back, but this way is better. Now he can pack a whole hard drive of pictures of dead, decaying flesh. He can light the candles in his little efficiency apartment and spend some quality time with himself while he admires the photos, just like he's doing right now. It's a spark of romance in his life that he feels is more than deserved. Even before the job, Felix found ways to satisfy his craving. He sought out those forgotten cemeteries on the edges of abandoned farms and wooded areas, just small collections of tumbling tombstones that no one gives a shit about anymore. He spent many a rainy night in these places with his shovel and his flashlight, digging for fleshy treasures and finding them in splintered coffins deep beneath the earth. Most of his best finds were from the late 1800s, just husks of mummified skin and empty eye sockets, light as a feather and home to entire generations of worms and beetles. Often he'd seek the softest, darkest hole in the tattered flesh of the dead thing and make use of it right there next to the excavated grave, relishing the tickle of the worms within against his warm, living flesh. He'd moan beneath moonlight with the only wildlife to hear him, his thrusts violent and frenzied, that aroma of ancient rot and dried skin twisting up through his nostrils. That smell alone is enough to drive him. Nothing intoxicates quite like the scent of a consenting corpse. He finishes with himself, the orgasm rocking through his body and causing his eyes to roll up into the back of his head. He wipes at his salty mess with a few crumpled napkins and rises from his chair, making sure to place the photographs back into his filing cabinet for safekeeping. The cabinet has a combination lock that he makes sure to click into place, that little sound of security sending a reassuring shiver up his spine. Felix passes by his aquarium, taking a moment to lean down and press his wet fingers up against the glass. The tank is filled to the brim with embalming fluid, and floating inside is a severed arm with a black cat tattoo along the bicep. It seems almost to shimmer there in that thick, viscous liquid, the black nail polish still shining in its preserved state. He took this arm from a little goth cutie that was bound for the crematory furnace. The name on her death certificate was Lily, and she had plenty of wicked ink covering her pallid flesh, but the black cat tattoo was Felix's favorite. It seemed so real, almost leaping right off the skin with bared teeth and claws. He couldn't stop staring at it while he was fondling Lily's corpse just a week or two ago. Such a beautiful body, such soft, delicate skin. He enjoyed every inch of it. Felix stands in the stall of a public restroom a few days later, lazily watching his urine come and go in little yellow spurts. He lets his eyes crawl along the pitted graffiti that marks a section of stall beside him, most of it just gibberish. Something near the bottom catches his attention, though. Most of the messages are scrawled in pen or magic marker, but this message was carved into the stall surface with something sharp. Felix feels himself stiffening with curiosity, his tongue slipping out to lick a few droplets of perspiration from his upper lip. The message reads, "Shaved pussy, extra sweet, call or text Monroe," with a phone number carved underneath. Felix prefers most of his sexual encounters to involve the dead, but he's not opposed to some warm living love now and then. His desire doesn't discriminate in such situations. He pulls out his spiffy smartphone and adds a number to the contacts list, his thumb lingering over the call button for a few moments after it's done. He decides on a text instead. It's less personal, and a simple text can open up a door to so many possibilities. He leaves the rest stop with a big smile on his face, a few little strings of saliva glistening between his moss-colored teeth. He sits behind the wheel of his battered Plymouth an hour later, his eyes locked on the glowing screen of his phone. Monroe responded to the text almost immediately. Felix is looking down at the address accompanied by a smiley face. Most people would be cautious about driving to a stranger's home for sex, but Felix isn't one of them. Some of his best adventures have come from scrolling through random Craigslist postings in the personal section. He spends a long time driving, the road taking him from downtown to the wilderness that lies beyond. He passes a few mobile homes and shanty shacks as the road climbs higher up the mountain, and then he makes his turn along a little dirt trail he's looking for. The trail is rugged with overgrowth encroaching on both sides, almost like nature is adamant about retaking it. Felix bumps along behind the wheel, his mind dancing with images of plain white cotton panties being pulled down past smooth thighs. He pictures Monroe as a freckled farm girl, with just a little tuft of red pubic hair decorating her mound. He's excited for whatever dirty surprises she might have waiting for him. And if he loses his erection, he'll just make her lie still and motionless like most of his other lovers. That always does the trick. Finally, the cabin oozes out of the shadows, the Plymouth's headlights cutting through the light to illuminate a few weathered walls and a rusty tin roof. The place screams sketchy. Felix likes sketchy, though. He wastes no time killing the engine and opening the driver's side door, his attention momentarily caught by the dead willow tree that looms over the cabin, so close that the branches of the tree scrape across the roof. Even dead trees manage to turn Felix on a bit. He hurries toward the front door, a tent already beginning to form beneath the material of his blue jeans. The door is halfway open and he lets himself in without knocking, his passion fueling him and overriding all else. The cabin interior is incredibly sparse, almost no furniture, just inky darkness that seems to cling to the walls. There are no lights on inside, the floor barely lit by a few moon rays that drift down from a shattered window to Felix's right. There's a table pushed to the far back of the cabin's main room, and Felix can just make out some movement there in the shadows. He knows immediately that he's not alone. And this causes a grin to stretch across his face, his skin growing taut. His cheeks are already flushed as he reaches down to tug at the bulge in his jeans. "Is it really shaved?" he asks, taking a step closer to the table. A voice responds, lilting and pleasant. The strange thing is that it doesn't seem to come from the table. It seems to come from no discernible place at all, just a wind blowing through distant reeds. "It's shaved." Felix chuckles, his right hand rising up to his mouth so that he can suckle at the fingertips. They taste like embalming fluid. "And it's sweet, right?" he asks, his tone playful. "Oh yes, it's very sweet." Felix detects movement from the table, something heavy landing on the floor. Maybe the girl's a little on the bigger side. He doesn't mind that at all. He reaches up to touch his wet fingers to his thinning hair, slicking it back just a bit. The floorboards creak as she comes to him, that weak moonlight shining down upon her as she gets within a few feet of Felix. He stares down, his breath momentarily catching in his throat. At first, he's not entirely sure what he's seeing. The flesh is scarred and pitted, cleanly shaved. The eyes are yellow orbs that burn in the gloom, a wet pink tongue slipping out to lick blackened lips. Felix thinks the teeth are the worst, but then he notices the smell. It's a cloying, overpowering perfume that clings to the shaved skin. It's so incredibly sweet that it makes him gag. The panther barely reacts, remaining almost perfectly still with the moonlight shining down on its pink, raw skin. The moonlight intensifies, and Felix catches sight of a cracked mirror hanging above the table. There's a girl staring at him from the surface of the mirror. Pallid skin, dark eyeshadow, lips painted ruby red. It's Lily. Just as he makes this horrifying revelation, she raises up a severed stump where her arm should be and waves it at him. Felix is still focused on the specter in the mirror when that sweet shaved pussy that he came here for pounces from the floor and sinks sharp white canines into his groin. He's knocked immediately down to the floor, blood gushing down his jeans as the first screams start to struggle past his lips. The pain assaults him in red waves, and each time he tries to push up against the panther's smooth shaved skin, he's met with a swipe of heavy paws, the claws rending the flesh of his face into ribbons. Just as the panther's teeth find his throat, Felix has a moment to think about how similar the cat looks to the tattoo that was on Lily's arm, especially the eyes. The next revelation that comes to him is the full name he saw on Lily's death certificate before he mutilated her dead body. Lily Monroe. There's a hollow crunch followed by a tearing sound as Felix's throat is ripped outward, and by then he's beyond all revelations. The next morning, a park ranger finds Felix's abandoned vehicle parked in front of the cabin, the driver's side door open and the battery long dead. He takes a moment to explore the cabin, finding it empty and abandoned. Finally, he looks upward at the dead willow tree outside of the cabin, his mouth falling agape at the carnage. Felix's disemboweled carcass is splayed across a thick limb, his intestines trailing out of him to decorate the tree's empty branches.